Okay, so kind of our last bit of metabolism, at least at this point for our test, is going to be talking about what happens with metabolism when we start exercising and what happens when we stop exercising. And so part of this, I'm going to show you guys the big picture of what happens first, and then next week after the test, we'll actually start talking about like what is going on in some of these spaces, what is the enzymes, how are we controlling some of this onset stuff and some of the offset stuff. Okay, so we're just going to talk about kind of the big general idea first. So, let's do something. Ryan, stand up. Okay, on the other side of your desk. We don't want you to be too close to Jacob there. All right, so just stand. All right. So we can imagine that as Ryan stands there, right? She needs some amount of energy just to stand. She's alive. Okay. Ryan, can you start just jogging in place a little bit? Yeah.
I don't like this. I'll just go in circles. Go ahead, keep going.
Yes, please. So she's jogging in place. So she went from something where she's not doing anything, right, to I'm jogging in place where there is this immediate jump. Okay, you can stop now. So there's this immediate jump in energy demand, right? She needs a certain amount, and it's not that pronounced because she's just jogging in place. You could have brought some heavier weights and like, Ryan, you're just going to start doing squats or something for us. She might have enjoyed that more. I don't know. Or we could have asked her to run really fast. Okay, you can, right? So the start of a bout of exercise, or the start of any kind of movement, okay, especially if it's any more than just like standing or even beginning to start to walk or something, okay, is going to create a kind of unique disturbance in our physiological systems. And we have to be able to respond very, very quickly in order to provide energy to match the demand. And that's going to create a situation whereby we're going to kind of put this idea of which energy system are we using to test and kind of put them in conflict with each other. Similarly, when we stop exercising, okay, then we go from needing, right, some additional or kind of higher amount of energy to basically right back down in theory to resting levels, okay? And so starting sort of the onset of exercise and the offset of exercise is these kind of special unique situations. Okay? So what I'm trying to illustrate here, and I hope that by having Ryan do that, I can create a little bit of a picture of what's going on. So we imagine, okay, that we've got on our y-axis, we have some measure of oxygen consumption. So we've got VO2 here, all right? The x-axis is just time, okay? It's time. And so here, right, at this particular level, we've got Ryan standing. She's not doing anything, she's just standing. There is some resting level of oxygen consumption required to keep her alive. The thing to keep in mind is that as soon as you begin exercising, I go from here to now I'm jogging at 6 miles an hour, okay? Immediately my energy demand, the need in my muscles goes from right here all the way up, okay? It goes up to whatever I need at 6 miles an hour, okay? So in theory, from an O2 consumption standpoint, if I'm jogging, that may be considered kind of vigorous intensity activities. I may be at 6 or 7 or 8 times resting metabolic rate immediately, okay, from an energy demand standpoint. I need a lot more energy. But if we track the changes in oxygen consumption, what we note is that energy demand is here, but oxygen consumption is going to lag and trail and take a couple of minutes or thereabouts to kind of get up and reach this what we would call a steady state. So I'm at rest, I'm doing nothing, I get to 6 and I'm jogging and I'm doing my stuff, and that's not that difficult. Okay, we'll assume I am in reasonable shape, which is a false assumption. But I get there and I can maintain steady state. Okay, so when I've been running at 6 miles an hour the whole time, but yet my O2 consumption is lagging behind all. Okay? So out of necessity, because I can actually run, because I immediately need more energy, where does the energy have to come from? So I am immediately going to need to use any stored ATP that I have, creatine phosphate, and potentially full glycolysis. Okay? I'm trying very hard not to call it anaerobic glycolysis. Right? But glycolysis making lactic acid. Okay? So the area shaded here in purple, all right, is oftentimes termed oxygen deficit. Okay? This is energy required at the onset of a bout of exercise that we know, because there is this lag in oxygen consumption, is not being provided by anaerobic metabolism. Okay? This is one of the few ways in which we can at least estimate some amount of anaerobic energy expenditure. Okay? Is this area between kind of you could call it the area under our kind of square or rectangle curve in this parabolic increase or exponential increase. Oxygen. Okay? That's called oxygen deficit. Okay? The deficit comes from, the Harvard Fatigue Lab in like the 1920s when they began studying these things. Our undergrad, does Dr. Mike talk about the Harvard Fatigue Lab at all? No? Right. So the first laboratory studying exercise was in the business school at Harvard in the 1920s. It was called the Harvard Fatigue Lab. And it was set up in the business school to study how we can exploit workers to a greater extent with working conditions and factors. Like what happens when it's hot, right? What do we need to do to them to allow them to continue working longer, harder hours when it's hot? And understanding sort of environmental stress and things during work. And so you can trace almost everyone in exercise physiology now. If you go back through like who taught me, who taught that person, you can trace almost all of us back in some way, shape, or form to the Harvard Fatigue Lab. Jacob, you want to talk about the Harvard Fatigue Lab at all in K-State? Oh, okay, well, so clearly the textbook that Dr. Mike uses here doesn't talk about it. Use a different book, they talk about the Harvard Fatigue. Very, very famous. You go to the American College of Sports Medicine meetings, like 3 of the primary lectures that they give are named after the guys that work in the Harvard Fatigue Lab. So, there's a guy named A.B. Hill, he worked in the Harvard Fatigue Lab, and was awarded the first Nobel Prize for basically the heat production for muscle contraction. One of the first exercise physiologists to do all of this was back in the 1930s. They coined this. You're in a deficit. This is work done where they were thinking we have to borrow oxygen, we're going to borrow energy from someplace that's not this. Okay? That's deficit. If you think of, I've begun to exercise and it feels shitty at the start, you feel worse at the start, right? And then you kind of get out here and you go 4 or 5 minutes and you feel better. Guess why? You probably, in this purple area at the onset, you probably have higher levels of blood lactate than you do once you reach steady state VO2. Okay? It feels worse because you're making more metabolic byproducts that are going to get over. Right? It feels like it's something that is at a much higher percentage of VO2 than what it realistically is. All because of this lag. Okay? We can talk about the lag. We can talk about how to kind of get rid of the lag a little bit later on. Okay? The primary thing that's going to cause aerobic metabolism to be slow to kind of get turned on is that one, it has many, many steps, and there's a lag in the activation of the enzymes that are involved in phosphorus, okay, especially the mitochondrial-derived enzymes. What you will see next week is that a lot of the enzymes and processes in metabolism are controlled by the concentration of ADP. And so ADP levels, as they rise, they're going to stimulate all of these enzymes to speed up and drive reactions faster. Well, at the onset of exercise, because I have an ability to replenish ADP using creatine phosphate and the like, then ADP levels aren't going to rise quite as quickly as we might need them to. So we're going to use up some anaerobic metabolism before we get ADP levels high enough to drive this increase in our enzymatic activity. Okay. On the other end of things, so what's in the movie Tommy Boy? Oh, then you have the only one. Okay, y'all should at least yes. You should find Tommy Boy and watch it and appreciate it for the wonderfulness that is Chris Farley and all those. But there's a scene where he's in the thing. He's like, he's in these cars. He's like, you're driving along, crash, dead, whatever. I don't know. I'm just thinking like you're running along, and I'm thinking about Tommy Boy. Total aside that makes no sense to you guys. So as I show my age, the movie's older than you guys, so yeah. Anyway, we're going here. Ryan's running. She's at 6 miles an hour, and then she gets to wherever she needs to go. Stop. Okay. Immediately stop. The energy requirement from her muscles falls right back down to baseline. Immediately. Okay. We've shut the car off. We're done. And yet, if we graph oxygen consumption, it's going to slowly, okay, work its way back down to baseline. If it ever actually gets back to baseline during that day, okay, sometimes it doesn't. All right, and so this thing here, the area kind of under this curve, shaded in this kind of weird greeny blue color, is called excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, EPOC. Okay? It used to be called oxygen debt. Okay? Initially, they looked at this here and they saw that it stayed up afterwards, and so they thought it stays up afterwards to the exact same size as it was lagging here. So that you basically use the debt to pay off the deficit, which, if you know anything about money, both of those words mean about the same thing. It seems kind of dumb, but you understand that nomenclature has always, it's changed in the 100 years since we came up with this. So we now realize that what happens after exercise tends to be much larger, okay? There's a much larger additional expenditure of energy after exercise than kind of this deficit that we have here that's provided by metabolism. Okay? Now, they weren't entirely wrong. Okay? They thought, I've done something, I've put myself into a deficit here, I need to pay it back from this stuff. And they're not wrong. We use this extra energy to replenish creatine phosphate, replenish ATP, clear out lactate and hydrogen to deal with the increase in temperature that we have in the thermoregulatory process. Okay? All of this is going to be in response to some of the stuff that went on here, but it's also in response to things that are happening here. It's bigger. Okay? A couple of things to know about EPOC. And I guess in some ways the slope of these curves, okay? You can fit a curve at the start, you can fit a curve at the end. The steeper the curve, so the faster that your O2 consumption rises to steady state, and the faster or the steeper that it recovers back down, is a reasonable approximation of aerobic training status. reasonable approximation of how many and how well the mitochondria in your skeletal muscle work. Okay? People that are in better shape have faster onset kinetics. Okay? They also have faster, what we would call recovery kinetics. You take two people, a person that's really highly aerobically trained and a person that's sedentary, they're exactly the same size, they weigh the same, you have them do the exact same bout of exercise and exactly the same sort of VO2 number, the highly trained person is going to get back down, faster. Okay? There's some really interesting performance implications to all of this. One of the things that happens out here, as I said, is you're clearing lactate, clearing hydrogen, okay? You're recovering creatine phosphate. The faster this gets that back down to baseline, the faster you're able to resynthesize creatine phosphate, the faster the half-life of all of that is going to be. Okay? So think about sports or things that require you to use a lot of creatine phosphate, which is pretty much every sport, unless you're like a marathon. Okay? I'm an offensive lineman, and I gotta try to block Alex. I got to block him for like 30 seconds or something. Then I got to run and chase somebody down because they're going to try to hurt my guy, right? So I've done something for 5 or 6 seconds, and I got to get back in the huddle, although we don't huddle anymore, right? Just don't play as fast as you can. Go, 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 right? If you're lucky, you get 30 seconds in between snaps something. Well, if you ask me, football players need to be in good aerobic and metabolic shape, even though what they do as part of their sport is in no way, shape, or form really an aerobic sport. The answer has to be yes, because they need to get this, they need to get their creatine phosphate. If we were to graph creatine phosphate levels, they look like the inverse of this. They start low, and they're going to creep up like this. They need to get as much of that back in that short window of time as possible, so they can have as much ready for the next play, the next play, the next play, as they can. So yes, the offensive lineman needs to go run. Go run for a while. All right, so that's some of the utility. People have done stuff with this. You can just measure the area under this curve if you want to, and use that as a way to estimate VO2 max. Okay, Jake.
Since we're talking about how like running would help improve mitochondrial function and things like that, when we take into effect like how training affects how muscle is like tight and how you become more efficient one way than the other, does that kind of play into where maybe if you overrun, you're going to have a detriment, even though you're doing improvement, you're going to have a detriment to like what you were just giving as an example for speed and you need to be able to recover faster because then maybe if they're slowing down since they're losing type 2A muscles.
So that's a really interesting question. So if I think I understand what you're saying, you've got to be careful and remember kind of what fiber type conversion can take place. Right? So I never turn type 2 fibers into type 1 fibers, no matter how much I try. I can turn 2X into 2A, and the good thing is that the 2A, while they are technically a little bit slower than the 2X, they can have a huge amount of mitochondria. So I can maintain most of the kind of fast twitch or speed or velocity of contraction, while also being able to have a type 2A fibers oftentimes have more mitochondria. Well-trained people have more mitochondria in them than type 1 fibers do. So in that way, Jacob, I'm not 100% sure that that what you're saying exactly applies. The thing that we've really got to be concerned about is can you run too much is there's a little bit of there can be some interference in the neuromuscular adaptations that take place. So if you do a lot of activities where you are going relatively slowly, right, like jogging or those kinds of things, then you may lose or not max out your adaptation in the system that will allow you to generate force really, really quickly. And so you may have to balance, like I'm an offensive lineman, I need all my force, and I need it right freaking now. Right? Here comes Alex, right? I need it right now. And so if all I do is I run kind of long and slow, then I'm not training in a manner where I do a lot of really fast contracting outside of my sports specific stuff. That may be not good. So you can make an argument that maybe they don't need to be long, they should be doing interval training. Right? They're just going to run sprint sprints with gas or I'm going to do things really quickly. I'm going to run at a very fast rate, but I'm also going to be able to drive some very fast. I'm not sure if there's a huge amount of actual scientific evidence that supports any of those things that I just said. That's one of those things that makes pyramids. I mean, there is some evidence on like what allows you to contract faster. You have to train fast. You have to lift as much weight as possible as fast as you possibly can. That's one of the ways that you train yourself to get better at the concepts of specificity. If I'm still doing that, and then I'm also doing longer, slow stuff, there's probably not going to be that much. Good. Cool. All right. Any other questions? Ryan, did you have a question, or you were just sort of stretching or something, plotting your revenge against me for making you,
Something that I saw that I thought was super interesting too is it doesn't even have to be a concentric contraction for the speed of the contraction. So lead like mechanics. There's paper with like eccentric contractions and fast and slow, and they saw that very forcible with the fast eccentrics, no concentric motion. I thought that was like super interesting. So you don't have to train concentric force and still have.
So you guys will see when we get into some of the training applications. There is something magic about eccentric contraction. I say magic, but it's not total magic. But I mean, it is. There's something very, very unique that the body tends to respond really well, very powerfully. Part of what this tells us, right, is that it's about, it's eccentric. All I'm really doing with the eccentric contraction is it's fast. I'm just generating slightly less force than what I would generate when I want to pick something up, but the rest of the pathway is exactly the same. And so it's the nervous system getting practice going quickly that will be one of the things that actually transfers over. The nervous system works is the same. Concentric versus eccentric versus isometric is really just a load-dependent phenomenon. Right? It's just I generate just a little bit less force, and so then it becomes eccentric, right? Or a little bit more force, and it becomes concentric. So yeah, we'll see more. We've got some really interesting. Stuff about that. Okay, so I want to show this. And I think, and I'm not a crazy person, there's something similar to this on the front side of things. This is looking at the recovery or the disappearance of blood lactate during EPOC. Okay? And so you can see along the x-axis down here, we've got exercise durations. We've got about 40 minutes or thereabouts during which time they're recovery. And what you can see then is that we are kind of hitting the peak. It's at about 5 or 6 minutes after our bout of exercise, and then we're going down from there, and they've got what is basically going to be different kinds of what you might call either active or passive recovery. So passive recovery is you just stop and you sit there. Okay? Passive. You're just not doing anything. That's the green line. Okay? The red line is we did this, and listen to what they've done is this is basically just a very, very, very high intensity amount of exercise to jack up lactate levels. Then you're just going to run at 65%, maybe cycling at 65%. Too, so at a very kind of somewhere in that kind of right below lactate threshold value here. So it's that's a little bit slower than passive, and then they've got walking or kind of walk jog in the yellow and purple here. So I stopped exercising, now I'm just going to walk around. It's very low intensity that should not in and of itself generate a lot of additional lactate or lactic acid. And so what you can see is that active recovery does indeed speed the clearance of lactate out of muscle. Okay? Do you need to active recovery in the way that Olympic swimmers do, where they cool down for like an hour and they now swim like 3 more miles? I don't think that's probably absolutely necessary. As you know, you can go sit and not do anything and you're still going to recover. So it doesn't really make that big of a difference on those things, but we can get it down a little bit farther, a little bit faster. So that is, I believe, the end of it. Uh-oh. All right, my soccer team is into extra time. Okay. Wait, what is on this slide? This is just showing the effects of training on EPOC. So these are some data from 1980. They're just going to show you how long it took them to get, how many seconds it took them to get down to they're working at 50% of VO2 max, 70% of VO2 max. And so then they were about 90% of the way back down to baseline in 80 seconds. So after training, that's all this is trying to show. You're just recovering back towards baseline at any given exercise faster after your training than before. Okay. So I like to try to illustrate some of those points just with things. All right. So let's go through our critical thinking questions. Okay. So somebody read to me the first critical thinking question. I don't care who it is. Can be anybody. Ooh, this is a good one. Okay. All right. Quick show of hands. Who took the yes side of this? Callie and Ryan. Okay. Another 5. Y'all took the no. Anybody try to strike a middle path where you were like hedging a little? Yeah. It could be this or it could be that. We're going to save Ryan for the Callie, would you like to share your rationale for the yes? Okay. So that's a very reasonable explanation. I can tell you guys if you got any of the guys back from space, they've been up there for about 2 weeks. Like they used to do in the 70s and things because they did they had been exercising. We brought them back down. They lost 15% of their muscle mass. I promise you that they were not nearly as aerobically fit as they were. They were disproportionately less fit than they were when they went up there. So that's kind of interesting. Okay. Okay. My guesses. Who wants to try to articulate, or my no's? Who wants to articulate why you say that?
Give me what I thought.
Please tell us what you thought. It'd be great.
So I said that, like, ideally having more muscle sounds like it would be able to produce more aerobically fit individuals, because when you think about like having more muscle, like you said, you have those adaptations and stuff like that. But I said that when it comes to like different types of muscle and how the blood is actually perfused into those muscles, that if you had more type 2, which may be more forceful, but have less oxygenation to those muscles in the first place, that, you know, if you were to increase muscle mass for type might not necessarily be increasing your aerobic fitness. You might be able to increase your force production and increase your speed. But when it comes to running long distances, you probably start producing more like lactate faster than if you didn't.
Alex, what'd you put?
So I was kind of along the line in terms of oxidation.
Shocked that the guys from the cardiovascular lab were drawing this back, being skated into the muscle.
Yeah.
Making us all about blood flow. Okay? You may continue, sorry.
That
Keep
is
my mouth
definitely,
shut.
that's definitely. So yeah, that's oxidation.
But,
I don't think they can get them really dry.
but if I have a lot of muscle and I train a bunch, I'm going to have plenty of capillarization into that muscle. So we can make a reasonable argument that, that's not going to be a problem.
The opposite of going to function or pulmonary system.
Your O2
How far you could drive, whatever you got to do.
Okay. I mean, at sea level, like O2 sat, you've got like emphysema, O2 sat is way more than what we ever really need, ever probably really use in our muscles. Capillaries can get to be an issue. Cardiac output can maybe get to be an issue here and there, depending on what it is that we're doing. So, okay. Y'all are thinking about this right, okay. Kelvin?
I kind of had a similar view of training style with basically your modality of training and how it can also be referred back to absolute relative terms.
Okay, interesting.
Basically, yeah, you may be able to consume more oxygen with more muscle in absolute terms, but relative to muscle mass and everything, it may not be the case.
Why would that not be the case?
Because
I agree with you, you're right, but can you articulate for me why?
it may not have the capillary density, mitochondrial density that a person training for with like marathons may have rather than powerlifters.
Okay. I'm thinking of something else that could be a problem. Do you want me to come back to that? Kristen, what about you?
I definitely didn't think as in depth as all these guys, but I was
That's
just
okay.
thinking along the lines of if you have more muscle, that's more space you need to fill with oxygen.
Okay.
If your VO2 max isn't any different.
No, that's a reasonable way to look at this. Ryan, I've not forgot about you in your middle path. We're going to let Megan have a go, and we're going to come back and see how you were hedging over here. So,
Well, just probably my background is in the cross country, and the aerobic capacity and fasting. And obviously, because of the training, we look at track over a lot more muscle mass. Doesn't necessarily mean that so the training something like that, but more muscle mass you have, you're not going to be max supply of it if you're trying.
okay. Why?
Why? Because there's more muscle mass.
Why is there more muscle mass working?
Because you have to move your body weight.
There we go. I have more muscle. The muscle is heavy, right? The muscle is dense. I have to move that extra muscle, right? And so that requires more energy. Okay? Now we're back to Jacob's thing. If I've got it, what if I don't have enough capillaries? Or what if, God forbid, I got a lot of type 2 fibers? Now I have all this muscle, but it's also not particularly efficient metabolically. So maybe in a bad place because now I have more, and it costs me more to move all that, right? Than what I can offset by actually packing my. Okay. Your other thing is interesting. I'm forgetting all of my evolutionary biology. You were saying teleology or not, but you're going to say like, when we look and you don't see like these giant cross-country runners, right? Maybe we should. Maybe we've missed the boat. Like, is this some sort of like selective process in the midst of this? Like, you're right. Like, they're all these little bitty tiny things. Yes, I mean, no, they don't have that much muscle. Now, what they don't also have is body fat. And so, like, the percentage of their body weight that is lean tissue or is muscle is very high because they want no extra, like, they have no extra. The easiest way to make your VO2 max go up is to just not eat between now and Monday. You guys are going to be in Dr. Webb's class in the spring, and you're going to have your VO2 max tested. Just lose 5 pounds over the weekend by dehydrating yourself, and your VO2 max magically goes up. Right? Lose weight's the easiest way to make it go up because you can't. We could probably have you run a little bit. We can get a measurable increase in expansion of blood volume, lead to a measurable increase in VO2 max within a day or two. But it's easier to just lose the thing. It's just water. The test is short, not that you're not going to make the blood volume go down enough. So, okay. Maybe did you have more to add, or that was just kind of where you were going?
I mean, that's kind of where I was.
Okay. Ryan?
Okay, so I said yes. I started by saying yes because I was like thinking that the larger the muscle, the more kind of mitochondria that you'll need to have like more oxygen to like give, and then like more ATP that you produce, and then it also could increase your stroke volume, cardiac output, and all that.
Okay.
So then I started thinking more about it. I was like, but the more ATP produced doesn't always mean that you have to have an aerobic pathway going. And so more muscle also depends on which fiber type that muscle would have. And if it's slow twitch, then you're probably more aerobically fit, as you're probably better with endurance type training. And then if it's fast twitch, then you'd be like more anaerobic. So like, that was my thought process.
It's probably, so my joke with you guys that the answer to any question is this is in some ways, this is a defense question. So I'll tell you guys the genesis of this question. You guys are familiar with the NIH, so they give grants out, right? You write this big long thing, and you send it in, and a panel of experts will look at it and decide, like, is your science good? Is the question you want to answer important? Is it going to be impactful? All of these things. So the NIH facility that I worked with, I was supported on as a PhD student. The entire premise was we are going to take these individuals that have had a spinal cord injury and have basically no lower body muscle mass. Their quads look like a cat or something, tiny little legs. We're going to take them. They die, they have type 2 diabetes, they cardiovascular disease, they die early, much higher rate. Their VO2 max is further for a variety of reasons. The entire premise of the grant was we're going to make the muscles in their legs bigger, and that will make their VO2 max go up, and therefore all of their health problems will be less, and they will live long. And it was like funded, like just immediately, like not a problem. And it was refunded 2 more times. Like it was basically funded for 15 years under that particular premise. Okay? If I make muscles, if I just give them more muscle, then their VO2 max will go up, and that's better for them because VO2 max correlates to all-cause mortality. It's better for them. So, caveat. You seem to have a question or comment?
I just have a question. So, are you related to this one?
No, they're we would occasionally test people that had a fit complete, but no, most of them were they had upper body slap these stimulation electrodes on them. When you sit on the edge of a chair or a bed, and start off, we put the electrodes on there, more like this. We gave them the stimulator, they would just crank like a 10 unit. It's very powerful. They would just crank the thing up. We call them on the phone, be like, "Are you ready?" Crank it up, and they started off by they would just do this until they could pick their leg up. Until they could pick their leg up and go out. When they could do that, then we put ankle weights on. We did 6 months of training, and their legs got 100%. Now you're going to ask me what happened to their VO2 max, and I'm going to tell you we got no fucking clue. Because we could not figure out a way, because they couldn't use their legs. We couldn't figure out a way to involve arms and legs, or primarily just legs, to be able to not have the fatigue and actually get to a high level where they can see what happens. They now they would use something called FBS, cycling exercise. They put electrodes here on the calves and their glutes and their hamstrings, and they put them on and they ride into the bikes. And crank on the bike is like that long. So their power output is like 10 watts or something like that. So we went through multiple iterations of trying to make things. And they get the stimulation make it so fatiguing. They go for like 45 seconds. They couldn't do anything. So what I would argue then, if I tell you guys that is VO2 max aerobic fitness? Is VO2 max endurance capacity? Does it denote endurance capacity? If we look at the people that have the largest VO2 max, they are not the tiny little cross country runners, right? You want to, if you're a guy, you want to have a VO2 max not in the 70s, but like in the 90s. You need to be, Albert's size. You got to be a big dude, right? Ladies, you need to be, 6'1" or 6'2" or something, right? You got to be big. You got to have a lot of muscle. So to do that, though, then you got to ride a bike, you got to row or something, where you're not weight support. It's complicated. Having more muscle will, in theory, especially if you're very unfit. You take an old person, they're frail, they don't have a lot of muscle, you give them more muscle, their VO2 is going to go up. Right? Their work capacity is going to go up. You take you guys and I give y'all more muscle, and it probably isn't going to make a lot of difference. Because you're already to some, if you're really low fit, if you get more muscle, that's probably helpful. If you're somewhere in the middle, it probably doesn't matter at all. If you're really, really fit, then you get up there, then it may, depending upon what modality it is, it may actually become. Right? And to my cardio guys, yes, the capillaries matter, what muscle proportion matters, those things. So any of y'all's answers could be right. It's just, is there some level of justification? Callie says, no, I need some initial level of something or I can't do anything. She's right. I mean, if you can't generate enough force to jog, then you're not going to get your energy expenditure up. You need the muscle to kind of raise those things. So, those great kind of open-ended questions where I'm looking to see, how are you thinking about this? Can you struggle your way through it? Right? So,
not necessarily a right or wrong answer, but like justify, use actual evidence.
yes. So, I mean, you can't just say anything, right? Like you could say no, it doesn't matter because the sky is purple or something, and that's not a way to justify it. But if you want to say, right, muscle weighs more than fat, if you add muscle, then your body weight goes up, which means you have to move yourself. That's fine. You can say no, if I have more muscle, then I need more capillaries, right? And we found this evidence that, the more muscle you have, you can't quite maintain your capillary density or something. Stuff that makes sense, yes, I'm looking for you to make a reasonable argument, right? That sort of thing. That's good. One of these years, I'm going to take that off of this. Actually, ask about that. You would be surprised how many sarcastic answers you take on the test I get. Like it depends. And then they will say something, I'm like, well, like, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. I got you. Okay, what's the second question?
EPOC can be used to estimate aerobic fitness level.
You guys understand? And I guess I should have said this. So, EPOC, all of the energy that we use when we're recovering, when we stop exercising, almost all of the energy that we're using during the recovery process is coming from aerobic metabolism. And so, aerobic metabolism stays elevated because we need that extra energy that we're generating there, okay, to help us replenish our anaerobic stores, to help us maintain pH, to help us, maintain cardiac output, blood flow into the skin, to help us continue to maintain those things. So that's why when it comes down faster, it means that you're recovering faster. It's only going to go down as you begin to recover. Which is a hard thing for us to measure. We'll talk about that later. Good. What's the next question? Yes. So the wonderful secondary criteria problem. What I probably should do, I always struggle with this in classes, trying to find a way in place. Doing some of the secondary criteria, there's a part of me that wonders if we should really talk about the cardiovascular. Talk about VO2 max as its own sort of standalone. Talk about metabolism. Talk about all of these things that gets integrated that contribute to it. Then, now you understand. So, if a secondary criteria for the attainment of VO2 max is 95% of age predicted max heart rate, why is that a secondary criteria? What's the rationale? What would be the rationale behind it? Why is it 95? Why is it not 80? Why is it not 100? Like, why are we even using heart rate? Like, what's the point of all that? Thoughts?
I would guess just because it's near max, so it may not be within 220 minus your rate, it may be within 5 beats over or 5 beats less than that, or more.
Okay. So, what does
It can be also complications with age. As you get older, and that wasn't a bit. It's changed.
That is a true statement, yes. I can no longer go to like CC's whenever I want and just eat as many pieces of pizza and never worry about it. When I was in college, we used to go to this place, Pizza Inn, which was a chain at one time. I don't know if there are any of them anymore. Every Tuesday, they had all you could eat like night during baseball season. Every Tuesday, there would be like, I don't know, 7 or 8 of us from the we would all go. We go to Pizza Inn, and I bet we eat just like pizza and a half each. It was just a ridiculous amount. They lost money on us. And we never thought about it. It was just like, oh, whatever, I'm doing this. Like, I was trying to like maintain weight during the season. All I did was eat. It does not happen. Now I'm like, damn it. I have to count out stat means like, no, you can't have that extra thing. I used to have that. I'm sorry, there was too many comments. Going to attack me about talking about so, does anybody remember from undergrad what the relationship between cardiac output and VO2 max is? That is cardiac output, yes. You're thinking of the thick equation, right? The VO2 is equal to cardiac output multiplied by AVO2 difference.
That's what it is.
So it's cardiac output multiplied by O2 extraction. That's the thick equation. But if I'm near max heart rate, what does that tell me about my cardiac output? I'm very near max cardiac output. So when I'm very near max cardiac output, there's a fairly linear relationship between cardiac output and oxygen. So when you near max heart rate, you're near max cardiac output, therefore you're also very, very near to what we expect to be your top of your VO2. Jacob's way heard of convective and diffusive VO2. Convective and diffusive VO2.
Funny fact about that, we got taught that by Dr. Kellogg this week.
Oh, did you guys? Okay. So we can argue that for the most part, the cardiac output is probably on the convective side. And AVO2 difference is giving us some of an idea of what's happening on the diffusive side. So it's just, convective component of VO2 is just, what can you circulate? Like what can you bring in and circulate in general? And then the diffusive is what can you get in, what gets into the capillaries, and then the ability of the capillaries to have it taken out of there. So Alex is shaking. Do you have PTSD? I'm sorry.
He went very in-depth about the model.
Well, there's some lines, and you can figure out where they intersect, and
We were not allowed, he showed us all the equations, we weren't allowed to skip an equation, we had to work through every single equation through it, it was great.
anyway, but that's why it's hard, why it's 95% of it. Because it's an indicative that we're nearing top end of cardiac output. Top end of cardiac output is highly predictive it's one of the primary contributors to this. You can't really measure stroke volume unless you want to let me run a central line. Or unless you want to do CO2 rebreathing, which is like basically trying to suffocate yourself. And so now we can try to estimate it using some of the stuff that they have. Measure with the stupid thin press thing. I'm sorry, Dave, you've been waiting very patiently with your arm up. I feel like Alex has got PTSD. We have to have, this is a safe place. This is fine. We're going to be okay.
I was just gonna ask about the whole thing about like knowing that the 95% heart rate thing. Could we say that that's also indicative because when your cardiac output is increasing, you start out with stroke volume and heart rate, and eventually you can't increase your stroke volume anymore, so only your heart rate's able to go up. So if you're at 95% of that, you're like pretty much done with the stroke volume section of it.
For sure.
Okay.
For sure. Near max cardiac output, like stroke volume has long since plateaued.
Right.
And so that's absolutely. And once you get past maybe 55 or 60% of VO2 max stroke volume, the next things that we talked about in 2 weeks. So why the stroke volume? Why does it plateau? When and where? But yeah, that's very much the case. Okay. One of our other criteria, we again would be more helpful to talk about, like, is an RER value. We mentioned it. That's because of, right, that's because we're making buffering hydrogen, buffering the acidity in our blood from making lactic acid, so we get extra CO2. So again, it just tells us we're over lactate threshold, and we're probably well over lactate threshold, which is going to be an indication that it's probably a very near maximal effort.
scores? Like if the brain's like, I don't want
So it's not super protective of glycogen. It's really protective of blood glucose levels. And so once muscle glycogen is used up, then you're going to continue to do carbohydrate metabolism, which is very considered as the primary substrate for this. Then it's all coming from the stuff in the blood, which either from what you eat or from glycogen. If your blood glucose gets to a certain level, and it dips a little bit, the brain will just make you pass out. It's like, nope, don't like this. We're better off to just lay here and do nothing and be in a coma than to have you keep running and use up all of it. So that's not exactly related to RER, but as you get the RER gets up in and around 1, then you're primarily just using carbohydrates. So there is, if you can do that long enough, which you're at the end of a marathon, you've used up all the glycogen. You're at mile 18 and 19, and you've used up all the glycogen, and you've sort of shifted very high. So there are people that will let you run like 18 miles and put all your glycogen and then make you do it. That's right in the midst of all of that. Needless to say, it's gone down a little bit, but maybe less than what you would think. So they would do studies. So in Georgia, we had what's called an environmental chamber. It was a room, and they could make the temperature and humidity in the room be whatever they wanted. And they would study the effects of environmental conditions, especially on the birds, because they were very interested in dehydration, sweat rates, and replenishing with either Gatorade, water, or this kind of thing. And they would do things where this was not only cardiovascular drift, where it's hot and it's humid, and you start exercising, you can go for sort of about 15 to 20 minutes, and you lose sweat orange. Your blood volume goes down. You do all of this, your blood volume dips. As your blood volume dips, then your heart rate drifts up. Okay, try to maintain cardiac output. So you do that for like a half an hour, and you feel a little bit dehydrated, and then make you relax. Like you do a max test, then you ride for a half an hour, when it's super hot and sweaty, and then immediately do a max, like go from going into a max test again. You can see 15 max that small amount of time just from the loss of sweat loss space. Or from the cardiovascular drift, because your heart rate drifts up as the sweat goes out, blood volume falls to maintain cardiac output, heart rate drifts upwards. And so therefore you're starting at a higher place, you've got less heart rate reserve to be able to make it to make it max. So there's lots of those criteria that were set out are there for a reason. And I probably should save that question for after this. You guys see what I'm getting at with the question, right? Here is a thing. We didn't just arbitrarily decide on this. They're based upon sound scientific ideas. And so if you understand the science or the physiology that underpins those, then you can kind of talk your way through why would that be the thing?
What about like RPE though? That's like not really something that you can measure.
So if somebody doesn't have to say it, they can point, but that's okay. I know what you mean, right? RPE is subjective, right? I'm just going to say, for anybody that's ever had the mouthpiece in while you're doing the VO2 max test or you're exercising, it's kind of hard, you're trying to say 12, and you're like, what the hell are you doing? Just like slapping at the piece of paper, or it's very near the end. The person just missed out on all of this. He has no idea what it's like to be tortured. You're near the max, and you're just like, get the thing away from me. I'm just trying to like slap at it while I focus on something else. So RPE is subjective, right? So you range on the RPE from 6. RPE was designed to mimic heart. The Borg scale was originally set out at 6. This meant to correspond to 60. It's a scale that goes from 6 to 20, which of course is stupid, right? It makes no sense. Why does it start at 0, there are some that go from 0 to 10 rapid. 6 to 20 scale is better. 6 is meant to correspond to a resting heart rate of 60. 20 is meant to correspond to a 20-year-old's age predicted heart rate. And you can pick. So a 10 to Megan may not be a 10 for Cal. It may not be a 10, right, to Cal. We have to give very specific instructions. Instructions that you give on the information and kind of different feedback that is driving some of those things as this kind of wild, gives these wild discrepancies in what you get from an RGB standpoint. We have some data from my lab that has suggested that if they're not given really good instructions, if you take people that are not kind of endurance athletes, that you're actually measuring the data from them from RGB, measure muscle pain, measure discomfort, rather than an actual measure of effort in those types of ways. If you give people that are more used to the scale and you give them more specific instructions, then you can elicit, they will rate things a little bit differently because they're operationalized in what you're asking. You can still just lie, right? You can't lie about your heart rate. You can't lie about your RER. You can't lie about your blood lactate. I guess you could eat a bunch of Tums beforehand and try to lie. The lactate wouldn't change. You just wouldn't have to change the pH if you ate a bunch of Tums. That would probably then change. That might also then change your RER. Ooh, test questions. Not for this test, for the next one. Okay. Those were the three. Was there a fourth one? Oh, 90% of age predicted max VO2. Yeah. That, of course, makes an assumption that you've got a person that's not super sedentary, or that's not like super training. There are some published values, CSMs, the Analytic Exercise Test and Prescription, which this week, for their second lab. They published some values for like ages and those things. But a lot of those values are from data that are 30 or 40 years old, so it's less than that. Especially when you do this work. Computers will fall out. Never get over that. What's the other question?
How can your body continue to work at a rate that exceeds VO2 max for several minutes?
Ooh. Good question. Ryan, what do you got?
I said because it can't stay at this point because of the other anaerobic pathways that are still running, and if they're still producing ATP, and so that's how you can like still work because you still have ATP generated in those pathways. Even if it's ATP.
We have anaerobic metabolism. Interested or freaked out? Go up, use some anaerobic metabolism, and go back down, and maybe replenish some anaerobic metabolism, and go back up again. And you work throughout the exercise. That's the thing. Think, oh, my VO2 max is that's it. Every time you sprint or you do anything that's particularly like high intensity, the energy that is required to perform that activity is likely well over whatever your maximal work rate and work rate is. You just can't do it for very long. Right? You can do it for 10 seconds or 20 seconds or depending on how high it is. Just a little bit over, you might be able to go for 90 seconds. That's where.
I was just going to ask, does your buffering system have to do with
a little bit. But a lot of it is, it allows the cross bridges to keep functioning, and it does play a role in while you're doing that extra anaerobic metabolism, you're still running your aerobic the whole time. Like a little bit. You guys have questions about that? What's it going to look like? How's it going to go? All of those things.
How long is it?
Probably too long. I was thinking so, if you guys would like on Tuesday, if you want to get here about 15 minutes, about 2:30 or something, I don't know when there's class after this. Is it later than that, right?
Wait, what?
I said Brian, not Ryan, I'm sorry. Dribble, I think Dribble teaches it, we can check. But if you'd like a little bit of extra time, so the in-class portion, it's going to be sort of definitions, like defining some things, and talking about the importance of those concepts. And then we'll be kind of short answer, essay-ish, draw some pictures, do some things. There are no multiple choice questions. It's all after response. Okay. How long it will take you is anybody's guess. I always underestimate how long it will take. But the in-class part is going to be much more focused on kind of simpler, fact-based, process-based, and system-based things. Whereas the take-home portion that I would give you on the classes over on Tuesday is going to have fact-based stuff, but it's also, that's where more of the critical problems like decide on this. So there will be some straightforward questions, right? There will be a section that is define these terms and tell me why they're important. Right? So there will be some things like that. There will be things where you have to list things and what their function is. And there will also be some things where, I may tell you, like, for me to check if you understand, like, how analysis works. I may say, okay, I'm going to give you a supplement that does this one particular thing. How would that happen? How would it calculate? Or something like that, right? Are people that are anemic? This is not a question. If you're anemic, you have less iron. Is there a chance that your electron transport changes? Right? You have to know, like, oh yeah, this is iron in their cytochrome, so maybe if I did have so little, maybe it would mess up the cytochrome. So I could do that. So there may be some things like that. Where, like, oh, if you do this, it's going to make this go up. It's going to make this go down. How will that have an effect on some sort of outcome? Right? I feel like it's not super tricky. Because you could have the undergrad class. Complaints about my multiple choice questions are tricky. This is not meant to be tricky, but it is meant to be thorough. It is meant to be that you actually know these things. And there are specific, very specific, right, correct things that I'm looking for on when I say, like, that's what I want. You know, right, the tendency is to write a whole bunch of stuff, you just got to get it right into it.
He's always so prepared.
It's okay. I was a natural forecast person. Mostly did me okay. Almost never came back to Bible. So people ask like, how do I study? Study. Because the way that this was the hard thing about being a teacher. The way that I would study is probably very different from how you guys study. I would just look at things and then I just memorize all of it and figure out what to do with the information to the test. You know, like my wife doesn't work there. She's got to write things and she's got to make up her own questions and try to answer those questions and work on kind of her thought process stuff. Everybody's mind just works a little bit. Other than to say, in theory, if you know everything that's on all the slides, then you ought to be able to make it. So you can recall all of that and do it down. That's a great aspiration. Generally, I tell people that you guys will probably do worse on this test than you will on the next two. One, because there's metabolism, even though we haven't done probably the single most difficult part of metabolism yet. The metabolism stuff is the thing where people tend to get confused or get a bunch of. Once it's your first go around, you ask the questions, really kind of study the questions that we're going to ask, and what and everything. Now, just remind you guys that we've got how we do with all of this. There's 2 more tests that are going to come. We've got the quiz grades, we've got the stuff and everything. So that's why we want to be front. If you're worried, you want to worry yourself. Let's prepare. We're going to come in and do it. You do great, awesome, keep it up. You don't do as good as you would like. Give it to you, Tuesday, Friday. Yeah, if you like, you can get an extra day or because I'm much more concerned about you, like what are your answers that you have time to actually work on it than before we get 3 days to get to sit down and say, more concerned about it. Exactly. If I give you too long, you're just gonna sit and wait for the last 2 days to do it.
How long do you typically expect like the taking answers to be, or does it really matter?
Does not matter. I always say the shorter the better. The shorter they are, the less I have to read and sort through. Some of you guys will write a bunch of stuff and it will be in no way, shape, or form like correct or even perfect to the question. I will put a giant red X through it, just like that's several minutes of my life that I've never did. So I don't mean that flippantly, but I mean like you just need to write enough to be clear and concise and answer the question. Right? I've done this long enough, and we don't get this very much. Pretty clear sort of bullshit here. You're just kind of restating the question, and you're just talking in generalities about how I'm asking for very specific things. Just because you wrote a bunch doesn't mean that it's right. Now, the other option is if you do write a bunch, then there's more chance maybe that you're going to get something for which I can give you some more credit. So you got to strike that balance. But most of them, they don't need to be that. A few sentences. What you will see on the questions is there will very often be, because I'm bad about this, so the key thing, especially with the initial definition people, is there may be a question that has 2 or 3 or 4 parts to it, and you available. So as you go along, if you're uncertain about this is normally somebody goes, you guys get together in somebody's lab, and the board gets covered up with metabolic pathways, drawing things out, drawing out all of the steps from sort of the cortex all the way down to cross-bridge formation. And all of those kinds of things. First year. Swirl afterward. Well, very good then. Make sure that I've got your critical thinking. I guess just show it to me. People are going to use it. Just let me see it. Kelly's got hers. Megan, yep. Okay, Christian's all written out. You already sent me yours. Okay. I'll get you those grades and everything, and we'll be good to go. Okay. All right, guys. Have a good weekend. Make good choices. Pardon?
That would